Okay, it's magical to be back here for year 2 of the fest. I was here last year and knew no one, and this year I'm super connected. It's also amazing to be in the room with some champions. Do the champions in the room want to stand up so everyone can see them? Okay, the champions are feeling shy. That's all right. Maybe we can get them to stand at the end. So the word champion has 2 meanings in English, right? The first meaning is the sense of a winner in a competition, but the second sense is of being a defender of something, an advocate for something, right? Like a champion of gay rights. So today I'm going to talk about that second sense of being a champion. Now, I know a champion when I see one. I specialize in seeking them out and getting them to work with me and write books with me, right? Here are some of the ones that I've worked with. They are people like this, people who are using their gifts for social benefit. Their gifts might be their eloquence, or maybe their presence, or their beauty. Their gifts might be their learnedness, their charisma, or maybe their access to resources or social capital, or maybe a combination of all of these things. Regardless, they're using these gifts for the good of people and sometimes of the planet itself. Basically, they're totally hot people. Whoops! So for example, Van is a champion. He's championing a world in which there are no throwaway people. There are no throwaway resources or places on the planet either, but importantly for Van, there are no throwaway people. iGen is championing a new era of caring in which the work traditionally done by women, such as bearing children, raising children, preparing food, caring for the sick and the old, is actually valued and rewarded. And Annie, whom many of you know from the Story of Stuff, is championing a world in which we value relationships and time more than stuff or money. So all of these folks are the source of the expertise I'm sharing as I talk to you today about why we need champions and how to be an effective champion. So what do they all have in common, aside from the fact that they're all extraordinarily good looking? All of them are working on building a positive alternative to the status quo. They're not fighting against, they're building something up. And although they're all highly strategic, pretty brilliant people, they never try to sound smart, right? They use small words, they speak from their hearts, they're authentic and vulnerable. They really believe that they can learn something from everyone, and so they're really deep listeners, too. And because of this ability to connect, they're constantly inspiring more people to join them in building the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. But in addition to achieving this one-on-one, this depth of connection, they're also achieving breadth of connection, which is why I have all these numbers up here. They're regularly speaking to, engaging with, and impacting the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions of people. In other words, size does matter. Now, small is beautiful, and local is beautiful. But when our small, beautiful businesses, our small, local, beautiful businesses start to threaten the gigantic institutions of the status quo, we're going to come under attack. It's already happening. They're going to try to co-opt us. They're going to try to destroy us, essentially, right? So we need millions of people with us. We need millions of people to understand us. We need millions of people to fall in love with us and join us. You might be thinking, Ariana, this is all very nice, but I don't really care about the fate of the world. I just care about the fate of my own business. But I'll tell you that you will always win more support for your own thing when you're able to frame your work within the bigger picture. So what do you all have in common with my clients, with these leaders? You are each champions. I'm the expert, I can tell. Each of you has the potential to become a champion not only of your own business or your own enterprise, not only of the whole of the collaborative economy, not even of our beautiful federation Ouishare. Each of you can be a champion, join me in being a champion, of the new story at the foundation of life. So underneath all of our institutions, at the deepest level of human existence, is the fundamental guiding narrative that determines our understanding of our relationships to each other and to the planet. I'm talking about the story that answers questions like, why are we here? What is our purpose? Right now, we're living in a disruptive moment in which the old story is crumbling. The philosopher Charles Eisenstein and other people talk about that old story as the story of separation. The story of separation basically goes like this. When I, inside this body, sort of consider this the limits of myself, and I feel like everything out there is separate from me, I'm afraid of what's out there, the other, right? And when I'm afraid of it, I have to try and control it, or I have to compete with it. I always act within my own self-interest. That's the story of separation, and it's underneath our economic systems, our political systems, our foreign policies, our attitude towards the planet. But there's a new story. It's already coming into being. Charles Eisenstein and others are calling it the story of interbeing. We know from all of these different fields, from ecology, from spirituality, from biology, from technology, that we are all connected, right? We know that ultimately whatever I do to or for you, I do to or for myself. That we are all, including the planet, in this life together. So with every action you take and every word you speak, you actually have an opportunity to be building the foundation of the story, this narrative that guides our life and all of our institutions. I've got 4 tips for you today for how to become an effective champion. 4 tips or principles. The first, really important, is answering why. Always start with why. But the answer to why, again, is not just about your own business. It's not about your own technology for the sake of technology. It's not even about collaboration for the sake of collaboration. The answer to why has to be something that's capable of inspiring millions of people. The status quo's answer to why always underscores that story of separation, right? They say things like, there's not enough for everybody. Grab some while you can. It's us versus them. But our answers to why can be because we're all connected. Because what's good for you is good for me. Because every life on the planet has value and dignity and deserves an opportunity to thrive. The second principle is to talk not to the intellect, but to the gut. Did you know that there is actually a second brain in our bellies? It's called the Interrac Brain. There are 100 million neurons in here. Scientists are only beginning to understand how this second brain governs our emotions and our moods, but we all know the feeling of a gut feeling, right? That sense of intuition. This brain, the prefrontal cortex, is responsible for abstract reasoning, but we don't rationalize or reason our way into the most important decisions in life. The decisions that we make with this brain are not the ones that matter as we lie dying. There's a ton of research, actually, about how irrational people are when making decisions, right? You can give them all the data in the world, but when they're making big decisions like choosing a politician to vote for, their next president, or little decisions like picking a toothpaste, it's totally irrational. So no matter how much data we give them, we know that it doesn't actually matter. So how do you speak to the gut? By being appealing, charming, funny, sexy. That's me. I'm not objectifying some other woman. The status quo is using sexy spokespeople all the time to deliver its messages. I think we could get a little sexier. Third principle, accessibility over accuracy. The acronym KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. Now, I've followed these really impressive philosophical conversation threads and read some really impressive academic articles about the terminology and the conceptual development behind our collaborative economy. And that's all really great, and there's a place for it within our own groups. But when we're talking to the mainstream, to the grandma walking down the streets, we need to leave that aside, right? We need to just leave that to the side. Annie Leonard wasn't actually always the Annie of the story of stuff. She was a garbage head. She was a technical expert, and she spoke in jargon and technical language. She used words like the materials economy all the time. So one time she was in this leadership retreat, and everybody's asked to pitch their work really quickly. And Annie starts talking about the materials economy. And someone else in the group, another very smart leader, raised his hand. He said, "I'm sorry, Annie, I don't actually know what you mean. What's materials? What are you talking about?" And she said, "That's what you're sitting on. That's material. This is all materials." And he said, "No, Annie, this is a chair." And by being simple and childlike, the Story of Stuff's message has reached 40 million people and counting. So don't be afraid to kiss. It's fascinating when you look over history how some of the simplest slogans, 3, maybe 4 syllables, have influenced not only the course of an election, but sometimes the course of a culture or a society for decades or centuries to come. The last principle is the principle of yes and. Yes and is actually a concept from improv theater. And it goes like this. When you're on stage with someone, no matter what your fellow actor presents to you, your responsibility, rather than disagreeing with it, is always to accept it and build on it, no matter where you wanted the conversation to go, right? So for example, this is silly, but he says, "Hey, it's Sunday, I want to go to church." And you say, "Yeah, and then let's take some ecstasy and go dancing." And he says, "Yes, and then let's drink some organic tea." And you say, "Yeah, and then we can have some nice French champagne." So you get the idea. Most of us say no a lot. And no is important. When time is limited, we have to prioritize. But in relationship building, yes and is incredibly powerful. It's a softening mechanism. It allows us to build something together. I want to tell you a quick story about iGen and the power of yes and, metaphorically. iGen spent what would ultimately become a six-year process, a six-year campaign, trying to get the lawmakers in the state of New York to pass a law to protect the domestic workers in the state. Domestic workers are that nearly invisible workforce of housekeepers and nannies and caregivers for the sick and the elderly. They're not protected under the labor laws in the United States. She went and met with lawmakers for years, and she wasn't making any progress. So she realized she needed to reach out to new allies, yes and. So she reached out to immigrants' rights groups, she reached out to women's rights groups, and then she had an idea. She thought, I've got to reach out to the employers of the domestic workers. Now, from the perspective of labor organizing, this is a huge breakthrough, right? Because in labor organizing, it's always us versus them. It's always the employers versus the employees. The employees are trying to pressure or shame the employers into improving the working conditions. But in this scenario, in the world of domestic work, the relationships are very intimate, right? Sometimes they even live together. So it made sense to talk about what their common interests were. And who were the employers of these domestic workers? They were these high-power executives, media executives in New York City, lawyers, et cetera. And when she won them for the campaign, the law passed. They won after 6 years. Before I go, I want to talk about an obstacle that might come up when you think about using these principles, especially the principle of kiss and yes and that's the fear of sounding stupid or the fear of sounding naive. Now, when I'm afraid of sounding stupid or naive, that's my ego. That's based on a need to prove myself. That's based on competition. That's based on the story of separation. The other night, in fact, another word for ego is actually the separate sense of self, which is a delusion. The other night I was in Berlin listening to the philosopher Charles Eisenstein speak, and at one point he said, "I may be naive, but," and he went on to profess his beliefs, and I realized in that moment that all the people I have worked with and many leaders that I've studied have been naive. Children are naive, right? Children inherently understand the story of interbeing until we send them to school and we beat it out of them and we indoctrinate them with a story of separation. Being naive is a great, precious source of power, so don't be afraid. All our words and all of our actions have the potential to be building this new story at the foundation of life. So let's try this again. Would the champions in the room please stand up?